Thank you to Contra and the Portal 2 speedrun servers for helping me with my custom textures and just being super awesome. Hey guys, 2 disclaimers before we get into the video. That's right, 2. First of all, spoilers for Portal 2, obviously. Not so much talking about the story of Portal 2, mostly just clips and sections under the assumption you already know the story. I know, stupid to put a spoiler warning for a game made in 2011, but still worth it considering I only learned about this game last year. Second, I've genuinely never done a video essay before, never written a script before, shout out to Millinote, never done this kind of analysis before by myself. Is this even analysis? It's more so just me yapping about something I found cool after playing Portal 2 for the 17th time in a row and taking weeks to even write out the script because I'm both lazy and already behind in school. Not even kidding, I wrote this out in my AP Psych class. Lastly, I love music theory, but I haven't really professionally studied it, so if I say something stupid or obvious, sorry. Okay, getting into the actual intro in my script. Portal 2 has a really cool soundtrack. Have you guys noticed? Come on. It works really well with the game, spoon-feeding you beautiful ethereal notes and ominous Cynthian tones like the robot Mother Bach himself. I love music theory, as mentioned before, and this soundtrack is one of my favorite when it comes to game music. Just Portal 2 though. Portal 1 has almost none of what I'm going to talk about in this video, even if you like getting your bone procedurally jiggled. Or you use it for music in the background, perchance. To start with a soundtrack, on the surface, Portal 2 is a very simple one. It has basic 4-bar melodies taking up most of the soundtrack. This is honestly a good thing. It's not obtrusive and plays very well into how you're supposed to be feeling in the game. It gives a good base for the additive music I'll get more in depth about later, too. Another thing that makes it seem simple is this constant rise and fall in the music. It's everywhere, with any instrument used elsewhere in the soundtrack. Portal 2 uses a really specific blend of classic instruments like piano or strings with more modern instruments like synthesizers on top. This can also include vocal, but it's not very common. Portal 2 makes very good use of Leitmotifs. Leitmotifs? Sure, whatever, tomato tomato. The most common example of Leitmotif usage in game soundtracks specifically is Undertale. But Yapper, I hear nobody asking, what does this have to do with Portal 2? Well, I'm glad you asked. That's only a few of what I've deemed the portal jump leitmotif. The modified portal jump, I'll call it portal leap since I'm just making all of these names up, is found a bit later in the game. There's music of the spheres. The ever-classic Still Alive. Okay, maybe there is something cool in the Portal 1 soundtrack.
I'm making a note here, huge success.
And my boy Reconstructing Science. I love Reconstructing Science. It was actually my introduction into Portal 2. Moving on to stuff you'd see more in-game than listening to the soundtrack by itself. The most innovative thing that the Portal 2 soundtrack does, that I know of, is what I've deemed additive music, as previously mentioned. Some examples of this ominous term I just made up is the thermal discouragement beams in Chapter 3, Chamber 10, or more obviously, the repulsion and propulsion gels in their respective levels of Chapter 6, Enrichment Sphere 1, and Chapter 7, Enrichment Sphere 4. To put it in Ratman's terms, a certain leitmotif for a puzzle element or section is added to the background music when in use. Notice the thermal discouragement beams have a bunch of different types of additive music. That's cool. Sorry, I don't really have anything interesting to say about it, but it certainly confused me when I was studying for this and realizing they weren't all the same. I literally can't play Portal 2 normally anymore. All I hear is the soundtrack. Sometimes there are multiple examples in the same chamber. This is best shown in Chapter 8, Chamber 3. Although most of the time this isn't the case, as there would be too many puzzle elements and it would be overwhelming to make them all do their own thing. This can sometimes sometimes be done in the same level, although instead of preventing overlapping, it shows progression, improvement in the puzzle. Excursion funnels aren't entirely included in this because they actually have their own music entirely when inside them. It seems like it's the aerial faith plates that add the layer here. But it's actually the momentum they provide that adds it. One more thing semi-related to the additive music, most obviously noticed with the gels, is their chambers actually speed up their bass music underneath the additive portion. The only nitpick I have with the setup of the additive music is that when the layer ends in the soundtrack, i.e. you've landed on the ground after a fling from an aerial faith plate, the sound just cuts off into silence. In most cases, this is fine. In fact, I love it. It's just that full noise to practical silence that irks me a little bit. Another more general example of this, the music changes depending on the situation thing, is environmental. It's kind of pulling you into the place where you need to go, that being usually a testing chamber or an enrichment sphere or a pump room. GLaDOS and Wheatley more obviously have a different sound depending on who's operating the body of GLaDOS, and that's most obvious here. Going back to earlier with the classic and synth blend, GLaDOS has more classical instruments and Wheatley has more synthetic instruments. I like to think that this shows GLaDOS used to be a real person, whereas Wheatley is entirely synthetic personality. Just a little detail I like, the lighting underneath Wheatley changes just to really hammer in how power hungry he is right now, but this is a music theory video, not a color theory video. A mini add-on, because I'm bad at transitions, here are a couple of my favorite tracks and sections in the game.
Du kommandierst mich nur rum. Und jetzt? Wer ist jetzt hier der Boss? Wer ist der Boss, hä? Das bin ich.
To finish out, this game is really cool. Go play it if you haven't, and if you have the time, which clearly you do, you just listen to me yap about a decade-old game soundtrack for however long this video is, please just sit down and listen to the whole Portal 2 soundtrack. It's ethereal. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss when I upload. Bye-bye.